So there I was at a pre-marriage counseling session with a lovely couple that I had gotten to meet actually back at Andrews, where I was going to school in a small private Christian university in Michigan. And there I was sitting with some friends, in essence. And we got to the very topic that most couples kind of look at with apprehension when we start talking about sexuality. We start talking about, what does God say about sexuality in a marriage? What does your past look like sexually together? Now, obviously, some couples don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to a pastor about what they did and what they didn't, and I'm not looking for details either. But what I am wanting them to do is at least have a conversation about, what was your sexual history? This person is about to be your husband or wife. They deserve to at least know something. And so they're looking at each other, and they just started to kind of look at each other in really kind of a nervous way. And the girl just said, "Pastor, it breaks my heart," and then she just started crying. She just started crying because her past didn't seem to align with what she felt as though God wanted and what she wanted for her life. They had broken barriers that they never thought they would. They broke barriers that she felt as though hurt them so deeply that she didn't know if God would even be with them in the same way as if they weren't, walking into this, having had completely held themselves to that virgin status. And so we walk through a story of just recognizing the mercy of God in our lives. And I want to start off with that from the very beginning tonight. Because I think if we don't start off with the reality of where we are and the truth of God's grace, it's going to be a very guilty, shame-filled space. But the reality is we serve a God who is merciful and just and faithful and forgiving. And so I want everyone to walk into this place with a clean conscience of understanding that the mercy of Jesus is for you. I don't know how many of you have walked into this place with an image of God who has the finger up there looking at you. And looking down, rather, with his hand and saying, "Shame on you, young man. Shame on you, young girl." But if we were to talk about sexuality now, we would talk about a lot of things, particularly in young adulthood. Where are we as young adults? Many of us haven't gotten married yet. On the stats that we had for the conference, over 80% of you here are single or dating. More in the single category than any other. Some are married. There was one person that said they weren't sure. So I don't know what that one was. That was the only one that was unsure. But there's this idea that, hey, here I am, I'm single, I'm wanting to know what in the world can I not do? The questions were fascinating that you posed. Where are we as young adults? Well, let's talk about young adulthood, period. This is a created stage and developmental stage of the last 40 years. Emerging adult or young adult never existed. It was either you were a teenager and then you became an adult. You became a woman. You became a man. What happened? What happened that we've elongated the process? 75 years ago, you would be married at 20 and 21 on average. Today, it's 28 for women and 30 for guys. And every single year that goes by, it creeps up higher. Why? Because of all these shifts that occurred. The problem is when we continue to push the limits, we have a space open here now when you could have been having sex for a decade. That's the truth. Because the marriage age increases, so does the ability in a godly Christian kind of context for you to have sex. Now, some of you are going to even question that, though. There is this idea that, well, does the Bible really even say you can't have sex? If you want to look at it theologically, it does have something to say. Paul seems to tell us in Ephesians that there's an order and a desire of God to present both spouses to him in purity. Okay? Sets the tone, all right. It also sets the tone that in the very beginning, God created Adam and Eve, and he said, hey, listen, bro, it's not good for you to be alone. You need a partner here, a man and a wife to come together to provide for each other. That's something you couldn't get from any other thing out there. Adam looks around and he says, man, everyone has a partner. What about me? Okay. And then we go on into the Old Testament kind of analogy of what God did. He chose a people in order to be his own. And whenever they went to another people and they started endearing their gods, started going to their rituals and their practices, their temples, God was what? Furious. Because he would always say, I don't want anyone else in the relationship. We are married. Paul brings out this context in the New Testament, that the church is his bride. The church is his wife. The book of Hosea portrays it in the most beautiful way. In the saddest way, though. Hosea was a prophet who called out to the people and said, let me show you what a life it looks like between you and God. Well, Hosea actually didn't want to do that, but God kind of put it on him. He said, I want you to go marry a prostitute. A prostitute? Okay. And he goes and marries a woman, Gomer, who's a prostitute. And he shows the people through this relationship of what it's like for God to be married to them. The woman being married to God here in this context, and she's not satisfied in the marriage and she leaves him again. And God looks at Gomer and he says, go get her. Get her? She just left me for another guy. Yeah, go get her. Are you kidding me? No. Because that's what God does. He always pursues a purity between the two people. A context between two who are known as a bride and a groom. If you look at the last thing I'll tell you, in the book of Song of Solomon, always in that context is there's a dating phase. And then you get to chapter 4. One of the most spectacular places, if you understand the analogies and all the things in there, you'll see that it's a very erotic scene. I'm serious. It's kind of graphic even. And there, all of a sudden, it emerges that this couple was dating, and now there's this sense of, wow, there's a wedding emerging, and then sex. Always there was this idea between one and another, husband, wife, groom, bride. But what happens, though, in reality? The reality is many of us have walked into this space with shame and guilt. We walk into this place knowing I haven't lived up to the ideal. And some of you, you've walked in here and you are a virgin. But you're scared because you're tempted. You feel the same feelings everyone else does. And there's the other person next to you who's had multiple partners and has had abuse potentially in their life. And they're tarnished in so many ways. That was the word literally that I read from someone in a question. I feel tarnished. And so what do we do then? Well, that's where God speaks so directly through that story of Hosea and Gomer. He's always the pursuer, even in our mistakes. God is always the pursuer of us, even in our lack of momentary self-control. And when we feel the guilt and shame about our past, God says, let's not talk about that. Because what I've come to do is bring you new life. The book of John, 1 John in particular, casts this vision to us so clearly. I want to read it to you just one more time. Here it says, if we confess our sins, 1 John 1:9, He's faithful and just and willing to forgive us and purify us from all unrighteousness. That is the heart of God towards us in our brokenness. It is always to beckon us back to Him. And so I want you to recognize the stage that we're setting here is one in which Jesus ordained an order. And yes, young adulthood has been elongated. And yes, the reality is many of us have gone into places and done things, watched things, and experienced things that we can regret and feel hurt about. But the reality, though, of where God's at, He's pursuing you. He's hungering to be with you still. He is not wagging His finger at you, casting you down. Rather, He's a father with open arms and says, come, be with me still. I am for you, not against you. I want to read you this one quote, and then I'm going to step down. It's just from a book that I've been reading recently, and I'm going to share it everywhere I can. Gentle and lowly. The heart of Christ for sinners and sufferers. I want to read this to you. Listen to this. The author says, God is gentle and lowly in heart. Taken from the text in Matthew chapter 11. God here describes himself as lowly and gentle. He comes to us in a position of humility and grace. He doesn't come to us in a position of anger and frustration. I don't know what image you have of God, but the image he wants to tell us that he's in is of humility and tenderness and compassion. And now listen to this, what the author says. This is the Father, meek, humble, gentle. Jesus is not trigger happy, not harsh, reactionary, easily exasperated. He is the most understanding person in the universe with our sin. The posture most natural to him is not a pointed finger, but open arms. Tonight I want to leave you with one final quote that I just want to kind of build the case for us here. A lot of times we think about, what is the boundary line, Pastor? How far can we go? Can we go this far? What about this far? Maybe this far? I think sometimes we forget the reality is this. Listen to the words of C.S. Lewis in the book, Weight of Glory. It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong but too weak. We're half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because they cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. I think when we talk about the conversation of sexuality, we have to understand the context of what God yearns for us to experience, which is so much greater and so much bigger and so much grander. And it might just be found in the wait.